Hello, welcome to Converging Dialogues. This is Xavier Bonilla. On this episode, I'm talking with Marie Favereau. Marie has her PhD in history. She's a member of the French Institute of Oriental Archaeology and a Fulbright visiting member of the Institute for Advanced Study. She has done research at the University of Oxford, where she was a member of the big research project there for Nomadic Empires, a world historical perspective. Her main interests are on the connections between Europe and the Mideast and Asia in the 13th to 16th centuries, and particularly with the Golden Horde of the Mongol Empire. We talk about her latest book, The Horde, How the Mongols Changed the World. Her book is absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed the book. It's well written. It moves at a really good pace. And there's so much content. And much of this stuff was stuff I was learning for the first time. So it was a real treat. We start the conversation by talking about what is the Horde and the distinction between the Mongol Empire and the Mongol Exchange. We talk about common misconceptions of the Mongols. We discuss the powerful figure and leader of Chinggis Khan and his legacy and impact. We talk about the Golden Lineage and how the Mongols were organized after Chinggis died. We talk about the hierarchy of the Blue Horde and White Horde, the concept of a moving city and how the Mongols organized some of their social and economic issues. We talk about various periods of the Mongol Empire, expansion on the northern road into Russia and how it has impacted how current day Russia is now. We talk about the impact of the plague and Black Death and the legacy of the Mongols. There's a footnote here. In this conversation, when we recorded it, I was getting over a cold. So if you hear a slight raspiness in my voice, that is the reason why. So apologies for that. Marie was an absolute delight to talk to. She was very warm and engaging and just has a really nice spirit about her. She's extremely brilliant on the Mongols and this whole period. That comes through in her book, which is brilliance, but then also in the conversation. She has a very nice way of explaining, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th century history of, Asia or Eurasia period. So most people can't do that in a very compelling way, and she certainly does very well. And so it was such a blast to talk with her. I highly recommend her book. And now I bring you Marie Favereau. Here with Marie Favereau. Marie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm very excited to talk with you about your book.
Thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be here.
Yes, you have written a wonderful book. It's called The Horde, How the Mongols Changed the World. And I'll be quite honest, I don't know too much about this period of history. And I have to say, your writing's great, and it was quite riveting. I really enjoyed all of the information that you gave, and just how comprehensive it was. So it's fabulous. It's really fabulous.
Thank you so much. Really, thank you.
Yeah. So tell listeners just a little bit of who you are, what you do, where you teach, your writing, all that good stuff.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm a researcher and a lecturer, and I teach now in France, in Paris, history. But I did my PhD a long time ago, and in between, I went all around the world. I've been working in the Netherlands, in Egypt, in US, in UK, and I've been in many places for my research too. So especially in Russia and Turkey. So I've seen a bit of the world, and I hope it sees in the book too. It's important for me, not to. Yeah, I'm doing medieval history, but not European medieval history.
Yeah. No, that's quite the resume there, and I think that probably comes through kind of in the writing of just how kind of global you are, and your kind of understanding. It's saying it seems like not just. I read the books and I did the research. It seems also that there's a part of you there as well, which is great. So I just jump right in. The book is called The Horde, right? So yeah. It's talking about the Mongols. So maybe tell us what the Horde is and kind of some of the distinctions between the Mongol Exchange and the Mongol Empire, because you make a distinction early on about those differences.
Yes. So my interest is really like to focus on the nomadic powers, on nomadic regime. So in the documents I work with, I found that the nomads use this word horde. And the word, we know it today, is kind of negative, it's like a crazy bunch of people. But in the past, in the medieval period, it means something very different. It means a military camp, but also a highly organized bunch of people, but sometimes even like families living, with a nomadic chief, like all the women, also the administrators. So it's like a small city per se, and it's not only about war. It's not only a military camp. So it's bigger than that. It's not only a camp, in fact. That's why I call it in the book like a mobile city.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to describe it. And the funny thing is, the sedentary travelers who discovered the hordes in Asia were very surprised. They have never seen that before, because it's really like something that comes from the nomadic world. And they did not try to find a word to translate the term. They used the Turco-Mongol term, Orda, Ordu, Ordo, and they did not, try to say, well, it's a kingdom or it's power. No, they kept it. And I thought that, it means really something, that the people in the 13th century suddenly start using this word, horde. So you see it everywhere in the sources, Russian sources, Arabic sources, European sources. People start speaking about those hordes, and now it's a common word, but it's important to see how where it comes from and the old meaning, and that was a more complex meaning actually. And so now to jump on your second question about Mongol Empire and Mongol Exchange, those are two important terms as well. So in my book, I work really on the northern part of the Mongol Empire. And this northern part of the Mongol Empire was called the Golden Horde, or just a horde, like the horde, like the biggest one. So that's why I kept the word in my title. The Mongol Empire was bigger, of course. It covered, more than half of Eurasia. So from Korea today to across Russia to the Black Sea, even to Eastern Europe. In the south, it covered Afghanistan, Iran, Azerbaijan. So it was really a huge empire. But there's something even bigger than the Mongol Empire, and it's what I call the Mongol Exchange. And the Mongol Exchange is how this empire generates the whole economic system it generates, the whole system of the time. Yeah. So that include actually England, that include the Baltic countries, that would include Vietnam, really the southern countries too, because they were all involved in a way or another in the big Mongol market, you see. So that's the Mongol Exchange.
Yeah, it seems like the Mongol Exchange is kind of the economic reach of their kind of empire of sorts. The empire is more of the actual places and or territories where there may have been some reach, but the economic kind of ripple effect of it was very, very, really to probably much of the known world at the time. Is
exactly.
Really comes out.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's interesting to use the different terminology, like not saying only Mongol Empire, but speaking about Mongol Exchange.
Yeah. So we're going to get to Chinggis Khan, right? Is this the right terminology here for his name? Is before we get to that, though, there's one key thing I wanted to kind of use as a preamble of sorts. Is for many people, they see the Mongols as these kind of savages, or these people that just kind of raped and pillaged their way throughout much of Eurasia during the time of their reign. And you kind of address that and say this is completely inaccurate exclusively in that way. And you talk about these three major themes of that the nomads were expert administrators, that they had this continuous evolution, so it was not static, which was a really big surprise for me when I was reading it, and that they were pretty globally transformative. You highlighted different points in the book. Of modern day Russia is really a testament to, the Mongol Empire, and so kind of just correct for us that kind of image of the Mongols as this kind of, savage, nomadic kind of folks, and how they were really very organized economically, a lot of hierarchy, how they were nomadic, but how they had good administration, all of those components.
Yes, absolutely. That was an important point in my book and in my work. And that was also something I really wanted to explain to people. The fact that, okay, we had the conquest period, but during the conquest period, we see that the Mongols themselves wanted to include new territories, new peoples, new cities into their own empire. And they were not like, their aim was not like to destroy everything because they wanted more. So that makes sense. It's the idea is not to, destroy entire cities. We've heard that, like killing millions of people, which is really, wrong information. And so that's one aspect. Now, of course, there's harsh power. There are moments of wars. The idea is not to say that there's no violence, but we used to think that the Mongols were more violent than other, conquering people, and that's not true. Clearly, we don't think so now. Why? But why do we think so? Why? I worked a little bit on that, and I think that because their empire was so big, their conquests were so large, we thought, oh well, then their violence might have been very also, really like much. They must have been much more violent than other people because they were conquering a lot. But actually, when you look at how the conquest developed, you see how many negotiations they did. They were very clever in diplomacy, negotiating. They would also, they would convince people, saying, for instance, in Central Asia, we know that Chinggis Khan had some kind of contract with in Muslim cities, saying, well, you will be free to, have your religion, have the clothes you want and everything, but just, support the Mongols and enter the empire. And they had a deal. And this is not well known, in fact. And why we do think that this was the basis of their success. I mean, at least it's a great part of it. So negotiations, and they also rule to administration and taxation already during the conquest period. So we tend to see every empire as a double, like at least, to divide the two processes, conquest and administration. So like first there's conquest, then peace and administration, but it's not accurate for the Mongols and for others actually. During the conquest period, there's already administration. During the conquest, they are already integrating people, like counting them, deciding on taxation, making arrangements and contracts with their new subjects. So we shouldn't, divide both. So that's, And the other thing is, finally, I think the image as this big cliche of the Mongols as barbarians also comes from the Mongols themselves, actually, because they were not very numerous. It's not a big army, and they needed to frighten people. I mean, they needed really to show people that they were masters and stronger, and so they wanted to be seen as harsh, as as lords. So they did not prevent, it's not like today when you have a lot of communication, when you're a new power, you want to be seen as, and it was very different at that time. So it's, that's why also today there's still this idea that they were very, very violent and barbarians. And it's important that researchers, archaeologists work, on the cities who were not destroyed. You can say, well, no, the city in the 13th century was not destroyed. So it's a lot of proof now that we can, show to the wider audience.
There's this element of, it's not just conquering for the sake of conquering. There's this idea of conquering, but to also govern. and how they will kind of absorb and integrate different people groups. Right? Kind of you're giving the example of the some of the Muslim groups that they were able to govern. It really was this idea of you're part of the empire, but you can do life how you want to do life, which is a fundamentally different story, which tells us something about kind of the intrinsic motivations of the Mongols and what they were up to. It wasn't just let's just get as much land or as many empires as we can. There was this idea of how to really flourish in a way of governing with different types of people groups and to evolve in a different way, which kind of brings us to the main figure, main starting point, I guess you could say, is Chinggis Khan. I guess the question I have about him, we've heard a lot of things about him. There's the obvious, 10% of all folks in Asia are descendant from Chinggis Khan or whatever the number is. Many things. He's, revered in history and stuff. I guess the biggest starting point here is, why was he so respected and honored during his lifetime and afterwards? What were these kind of qualities that made people follow him en masse? And then how was he able to kind of economically integrate throughout China, Central Asia, and other parts of the world at the time?
Yeah, thank you very much. It is a very interesting historical figure, actually. So also we do have sources on Genghis Khan. We don't have enough. We would like to have more, but still we have information. And we know that he had in mind really governing, so not like just raiding people, or also the idea that he wanted to transform the world for like into a big pastorate for nomads. We know that's not true. He had really much wider ideas. But also he brought something different, in a sense that he was able to combine all these diversities. He was able also to renegotiate the Mongols' position in the world. Each time he would have had a new conquest, he would renegotiate with the neighbors. So we are not the Mongols of 2 years ago we were a small group. Now we have China, and they will renegotiate, and that also generate a lot of tension with the neighbors, because they were very surprised to see those Mongols, changing so fast, developing so fast. So that's one thing. The other thing, interesting thing with Genghis Khan, he wanted to trade. Trade was like a key aspect of his power. And he supported traders, so he would really put a lot of money and effort into trade. But it's we have to say it's a kind of aggressive trade. It's not like it's very it's part of your position in the world. So there's a lot of stuff that how can I put that? Like trade was really a matter of prestige. So the deal had to be accepted by the other part. Otherwise, it would be a negotiation, and if the negotiation failed, it would be war. So, but it's not only Genghis Khan. It's like it was the same with the Qin, and it was the same in Central Asia. So trade was important. But Genghis Khan was also very curious about religions and beliefs. He would he would sort of listen to different religious elites. He would be interested in religious debates, as after his descendants would be also. He would be interested in Taoism, Buddhism, so Muslim beliefs as well. So that's made shaped a very interesting character, not like made of one piece, but very complex character. The other interesting thing that we still cannot explain is his title. So his first name is Temujin. Yeah. But then he took his title, we think in 1206, Chinggis Khan. So we think it means maybe universal ruler, maybe also, I don't know, Genghis might mean something like sea, ocean. So we are not sure about how to translate it. But anyway, this title was new. We have never seen it before. We've never heard of it before. We looked in every source, Chinese, Persian, Turkic. Honestly, it appears nowhere. So it's a new title. So he's creating something new. with this new title, and no one after him would dare, bearing this title for a number of reasons. One is clearly, it's taboo. It's like it's Chinggis title. You don't, it cannot be inherited. You cannot. There's no legacy there. It's like it's the one. That's very interesting. And after he died, he became a kind of god.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't say that, because my book is not really focused on Genghis Khan, but honestly, that's what I say in the sources. The fact that he became so, so important, but more as a god after he died, and his own lineage, we call it, so the Mongols call it the Mongol lineage. Yes, the Mongol lineage, but sorry, the golden lineage. And the golden lineage became, the most prestigious one in all, in all Asia, for all the Turkic and Mongol people for, up to the, I don't know, maybe the 18th century, 18th century. So he founded something. There's really a new, it's a moment, and the consequences are long lasting.
Yeah, it sounds almost like he became a type of symbol of sorts after he died. And I think during his lifetime as well, but afterwards, which is unique because it says it's something I think about personality or what he was up to or how he was trying to think about ways in which to have impact in a variety of ways. He's a very interesting figure. Before we get to the lineage, because that kind of is the next progression here, he was dominant over a third of Eurasia, which we stated. Well, what did the rest of the world think? And, how did they interact with this dominance? You have we have people like Napoleon, right, who was pretty dominant. We have many people that in history have been dominant. People weren't just rolling over. There was definitely people that were fighting back, but he had this immense amount of dominance, and it seems not necessarily easy, but it just was very fast of how he was able to do this. And that can't have just been because of his military hierarchy. It had to have been also because of his social hierarchy, how he was able to delegate to various sons and military leaders to have their own piece of the kingdom to rule, kind of what you were saying about renegotiating the ways in which these things were operating. So just how was he continuously dominant, and how did other people receive that dominance in the rest of the world? Was this like a bargain for them? Like, oh yeah, we'll be part of this empire and we'll get a lot of good things out of it? Or how was it kind of received?
Wow, thank you. That's a very interesting question, actually. When you look at how his empire developed and how he became so dominant, you see also that for the neighbors or the new subjects, they had a choice at some point, like staying with their old power, supporting their old, masters, or going to the Mongols. And in many cases, it was more interesting for them to go to the Mongols. Some really were really willing to support the Mongol, very like the Uyghur, for instance, or those Muslim cities I mentioned in Central Asia, in Afghanistan today. But some were more they were more, hesitating, let's say. So, for instance, the Armenians is an interesting case. So, Georgia, Armenia, so Caucasus today, were conquered by the Mongols, and the Georgians were really smashed, and they lost, really their power, their previous power. But the Armenians, who used to be under Georgian power, were interested in supporting the Mongols because, in a way, it would bring them a new, kind of freedom, and the Mongol were also very, very rational in their, in the way they deal with them. So they decided, for some of them at least, clearly decided that they would support the Mongols, and that would be better perhaps than what they had before. And it's just an example, but there are others who clearly saw that they could benefit from the Mongol power because they could keep their own identity. They would gain new positions, maybe like wealth also. And and the Mongol were good at, they had some kind of tolerance. They were, good at integrating new people. They were not afraid of foreigners, not at all. They were happy, open doors, because they felt they were not threatened by newcomers. they had this such, they had this can I put like this golden lineage, his lineage from Chinggis Khan and his successor that was so strong. They knew their rulers or their next ruler would be Mongol. So they were not afraid of having, ministers coming from Persia or from Franciscan and Dominican friars coming to become more or less like their secretaries. I mean, they were really open to, all sorts of expertise. As long as it was like, it would support their power and people would be loyal. It was okay for them. So that's a very special case in history, in fact.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I don't know if there's another period like it. I don't obviously do comparative history. Maybe other people have done that, but it's very interesting how he was able to be the size and scale, but then how he was able to maintain it. And so, it's interesting that you make this argument in the book of his son. Is it Joshi?
Jochi, yeah.
Yeah, Jochi. He's governing parts of the kingdom while he's still alive, and there was a point where he disallowed him to be the heir, but to still have his own power, which is fascinating. So how did Chinggis move from a bloodline kind of lineage to a more including marital kin, and how did that fit within the context of this kind of golden lineage which you've been alluding to?
Well, actually, Chinggis Khan had 4 sons with his first chief wife, Berti. Yeah. And we think that the eldest, so Jochi, was supposed to be Chinggis' successor. So there's one main, throne, and others have powers. I mean, they have territories. Everybody has territories, people, task also. But there's one that has to be the successor. And initially it was probably Jochi, but it's funny because it's interesting that actually. It's connected to what we've just said about the conquest and Genghis Khan's aim during the conquest. So Jochi was in charge with the conquest of a very important city in Central Asia, Urgench. And it seemed that he failed to conquer properly this place. Many people died. It took months. And he argued with his brothers who came also on the battlefield, and they all argued, and it was a big disaster. At the end, they conquered the city, but for Genghis Khan, this was not a success. It's clearly said in the sources that he was very unhappy with this, because for Genghis Khan, a good conquest means more people, not dead people.
Yeah.
And after that, we see that Jochi sort of was not included in the next conquest, that he sort of, we don't know if he really ran away, but he was not a central character as he was before. And it sounds kind of strange. So we interpret that as Genghis thinking, okay, he's not going to be able to be my successor, and perhaps thinking about another of his sons. So we don't know exactly, but that would be the best explanation. Then Jochi died very soon after that, and before his father anyway. So his own lineage, the Jochi, were very important in the Horde history, because they were the founders of, the Mongol power in the Golden Horde. They were not, they were part of the golden lineage in a way, but they were not allowed to claim the Genghis throne. In fact, they would have their own territory in the northwest, but not the center, Mongolia, which is Mongolia today and part of China. So the consequences were important, in fact. And after Genghis Khan died, it's his third son who took the throne, but we don't know if it was really decided before Genghis died, or if it's something that was decided afterwards, which is something, actually I think so, it was probably decided afterwards. But so all the branches coming from the 4 sons remain ruling branches in the Mongol Empire. So all these, they are sub lineage, they are all part of the golden lineage, but just some of them were able to get the throne, like the central throne from Genghis Khan directly. Yeah.
Was it this son, Batu? Is this the one that took over after him, after Chinggis died?
After Jochi died, actually, Genghis gave his legacy, like peoples, everything, to Batu. And Batu was in charge with the conquest of the Russian principalities. He was in charge of the conquest of the West. It's in the sources, like it's very large, like wow, to the west. And Batu is considered as the founder of the Golden Horde, and Batu would move to the west, to what is Russia today, and stayed there. It would never go back to Mongolia.
Chinggis instituted this kind of tradition and iconoclasm of succession, right? How do we understand afterwards, after his death and after his son's death, the blue horde, as it's called, under Batu, and the white horde under Horde, for understanding the ruling of how the new horde kingdom would be, right? So, what was the kind of rituals or the way in which someone dies, this is who takes over? How did that occur in the years afterwards, and how much of that is attributed to the kind of hierarchy and tradition and kind of administrative aspects of what Chinggis implemented from the beginning?
Yeah, the idea is when there's a legacy, actually the brothers have to share. So it's based probably on how, or maybe it reflects in how the nomads share foods. For instance, in a family, everybody has a share, but the share depends on your status. So it's not the same for everybody. Everybody has something. It's not the same because there's a hierarchy, and it's a very strict hierarchy. Now the question is, do you put like the eldest on top of the hierarchy? And this is something that was a debate for the Mongols. So at some point, sometimes they want to have the eldest has, the top one, and some other contexts they decide to have another brothers. So that means that they would, it means that they will lead this would lead to fights, but also fluidity. They were very flexible in their regime. So what they want is that people agree on the final decision. That's the most important part. That's what I show for the Horde. So in the case of Batu is not the elder of the family. He has an older brother, Horde. So Jochi had different sons. He had probably like 17 or maybe more. We don't know. First one Horde, second one Batu. But Batu got the position, in fact, the most important position. And yet Horde would receive something very important, actually. He had his own share, and it was a very important portion of territory, also very important warriors and people. And we called his part Horde as well, like for Batu. But we say actually also Blue Horde, in fact. There are two with the colors. So more for the Mongols, it seemed that Batu's horde was called the White Horde, and Horda's horde, the Blue Horde. After that, we have Turkic sources that say that it was the other way around. It doesn't really matter. The thing is, the colors just helped us to just help the people to distinguish between the hordes. They were all imperial hordes, like royal, hordes. It's not any hordes. There were other smaller hordes, but these ones were the most important one. And they had their own territory. So one in the west, one in the east. So Horde in the east and Batu in the west. And the interesting thing is that Horde, in a way, because he was the eldest, had to give up on something. And that's something I wanted to show in the book, that the Mongols at some point show that if you want to have a good succession, someone has to give up on something. And all their rituals of succession, they are big assemblies, we call them Horde, they're like big committee. They come all together, the princes, they certainly probably they fought against each other, like verbally. But then someone accepts the situation and say, okay, I give up. But he's also protected because he gave up on something. But what he has, he will keep, and nobody will claim, what he has. So that's a very interesting process, and it's a little bit like democracy in a way.
Yeah.
You see, that's what I wanted to show. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's you do show it very nicely, and it's again for me, and I think for most readers, it would be a surprise to think that that's how they were doing this. So life after this, right? As there's now all these different small subdivisions of hordes. Maybe just describe, and this is across the steppe, which is kind of the region in this kind of Eurasian part of the world. But just describe the two things. One is the moving city, as it's called, which is a really cool concept of being very organized out of any other sedentary group, but they were also known to be nomadic. So how does this kind of moving city concept and how their organization was helpful? And maybe under that, how they had economic efficiency, what the life looked like in terms of their farming and supply camps, just to get a sense of what life was like in the horde, across the steppe region.
Well, so those hordes, they would move seasonally. So all across the empire, in winter they would go south, and in summer they would go north. That's a very general rule. And then now the interesting thing is, especially in the western part of the Mongol Empire, they would really follow the great river valleys. So they would just follow the course of the river, and they would also, that's something interesting, travel almost, perhaps not every day, but perhaps almost every 3 days, or they would travel. It's not that they go from one point to another, like, okay, this is my winter camp, this is my spring camp, and this is my summer camp. And then I go from one to the other, and that's all. No, actually, they would walk like slowly with the herds, with all the families, with a part of the warriors, because not all of the armies in the camp, in the horde, workers, dependents. So it's a huge, massive number of people and animals walking slowly along the river all year long. And it's like a seasonal round. That's how I call it. And they also, the funny thing is, they have old tents that we call yurt or ger in Mongolian. And I thought before, when I started working on that like today, Mongolia, they would sort of arrive on the camping ground and would sort of build the tent. And then in the morning, they would, unbuilt, I don't know how to put that, but anyway, the tent and then go on. And so, but no, actually, we are pretty sure that the tent would go on a cart. So they would put it on a cart. The cart would move, and then would go to the camping ground. They would stop, and they would take it, from the cart. And so it's it's interesting. It's mobility, but it's a slow mobility, like every day. And the idea is really to follow the good weather. They are very clever. The idea is to go where the weather is the best, depending on the season. That's why it's so impossible to have good maps of their itineraries, because it depends. And we see like foreign travelers who try to understand this mobility and ask nomads, when are you going to move? Is it going to be tomorrow? But they don't answer that, because it depends on the wind, it depends on the grass, it depends on the water. And they can be also political issues and other stuff, so social things. So it's a very it's very fascinating to see how they moved all the time, but in their own very special way. And also I thought before that it was impossible that so many people could move together at the same time.
Yeah.
But really working on sources and description and everything, now I'm very sure that it was the case. They knew how to move all together. Everybody has his own place. So they knew how, that's why I say organized and disciplined. In a camp, they would know where to put their tents, where to put their carts, where to put their animals. It was all organized, and in some case, I'm speaking of more than 10,000 people. So it's crazy, and it's something that we don't see today. There's no such
not at all. Yeah, not at all.
organization today. So mobile or moving cities, or is this exactly the word I think to describe these hordes? Yes.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's so interesting how at a time long ago that there was all of this amount of organization, and when you look at any types of civilizations or people groups throughout time, you can see kind of the humanity, right? We do it now with, cities, and we do it with different types of transportation. They did it in their way, but it's this very kind of interesting way in which humans can cooperate. There are many things that we could probably get into, such as, the significance of Burke and how he was able to convert to Islam, which is a very fascinating sub-story. Also the Mamluk alliance and how there was a regime ruled by emancipated slaves, which is also very, very fascinating. But I guess the one point here before we move towards the end is what made the three hordes distinct during the Pax Mongolica period, right? Which is a kind of, I don't want to say infamous, but some people know about that period. How is that government sophisticated and the importance of trade key to this period and all that?
Yeah, so at the end of the 13th century, we really see clearly at least three big hordes in the west of the Mongol Empire. So the Batu's one I mentioned so it's along the Volga Valley. What is the Volga Valley today? Orda's horde more in the east, and Nogai's horde in the west. So Nogai's horde is near the Black Sea. It's near what is Bulgaria today. So it's Europe, actually. And I worked on how they communicate and how they, manage to sort of keep the balance and stay in good terms. They are very interesting thing. They are part of the same order. They are part of the same empire, but they have also their own ways. And I think that's a very that explain how they could support good relationship like trades and good relationship with their Western neighbors during this late 13th century and early 14th century. So the key point is how they communicate between a horde and another. They use a system that we call the YAM system, which is a postal and supply system. Actually, it's not only post system, it's also supply system. So they had those posts, trade. I mean, they were some were mobile posts, others were like caravanserai, like posts that were built, with like buildings. There were different kind of posts, but these allowed messengers or caravans to go from a river valley to another river valley, to jump from a horde to another horde, and to go to Orda's horde, and then Batu, and then Nogai, and the other way around rather quickly if needed, because sometimes it's not good to go too fast. For caravan, it's not good. But for a messenger, official messenger, it can be very crucial, really. So they use this YAM system, and it's an incredible communication system that really, we know they were this type of system exists before, but the Mongol developed it to a scale that we've never seen. And they also use so to access this YAM system, and so to get when you go to the YAM and to the post, you could get fresh food, you could get water, you could get a translator, someone to cook for you, warriors to help you, to protect you on the way if needed, all this. And to access this, you would show something that I call passports. It's kind of passport, Spadesy. And we still have copies of those passports. So they were metal tablets with something inscribed on it, like saying, well, you have to like to obey this person because he's sent by the Khan, by the ruler. And this passport would, allow you to get food and everything. and make you really an official. And this was given to merchants as well, and even to some foreign merchants. We know the most famous one probably is Marco Polo, who had one,
Right.
and used one when he entered when he traveled across the empire, and had one in Venice. And when he came back, it was found. I mean, in the list of items he had when he died in Venice. So and this YAM system really show how they could communicate, and it explained why they controlled the space, this huge amount of space, but in the same time they are not interested really in controlling every place, everything. That's also something I show in the book, the fact that they are very clever, because they understand where are I call them like trade gates, for instance, where are the crossing points, and these areas they would control directly, and the Mongol would be really keen to maintain them under their strict control. Otherwise, they don't care about controlling like huge territories, or so they are very clever, because they know their territories. So they would control Detroit. Also, they would control bridges, because crossing a river is a big thing. So you don't need to control the whole river valley. You just need to control the bridge, and it's fine. So that's fascinating to see how they handle that, and they know where the resources are too. So they are, for instance, some silver mines or salt mines. They would control those areas as well. So controlling the resources in key spaces, it's enough to control the. So that's one important thing. The other interesting aspect is that this part of the Mongol Empire, the Horde, with these three groups, is really on the west, and it connects to the whole trade network of Northern Europe. We know that England was involved. I mean, we have documents. So, of course, what is Germany today was completely involved in the trade and in the trade system developed in the Horde. We have documents saying that traders should be protected, that they are allowed to travel and to trade. There were taxes, but taxes were very light. And Mongols were keen to maintain them at a sort of low level, trade taxes, because they say, well, we shouldn't prevent things to circulate. So if we want to see people and things circulating, we need to have very low taxes. So it's all this debate on tax, very interesting. And also I very often have the question, well, Mongols are for circulation of things. Maybe they are like pre-capitalist people. I mean, is it for capitalism? But you see, the Mongols themselves say that circulation of things, it's good because it brings happiness to the society. It's good for for the wealth of the society, and things need to be shared. So, but at the same time, it's also connected to their belief of the past and the future of the Mongol order in the world. So they think that when things circulate, there's some benefits for their ancestors, because they would do rituals and make offerings to their ancestors with food and milk, and so it's part of the whole economic circulation. So the dead are part of it. So that's interesting. And also they think about their children and their descendants and the future, and they think that it will be good for the future as well. So the whole circulation of things, it's more something that there's something religious in it, like a lot of spirituality in this. This is the way they define happiness, and if this circle of redistribution and this circulation of things is broken for the Mongol, it means that there might be cosmic disorders. It might be very consequential and harm the Mongol society. So they are also scared of, troubling, of having troubles with, social order is really a reflect of this, sharing and circulation of things. So it's not really capitalism; it's something different.
Yeah. Well, that's super helpful to understand in terms of, how they operated and then kind of what the circulation was. Before we get to how the Horde and the Mongol rule kind of ended, just two sub questions here is, you mentioned in the book a lot at different points is, what was the significance of the Northern Road and how the Horde managed their Russian expansion and how they coordinate the kind of centralized management of Russian rule? It's very interesting. You make the claim how that impacts Russia today and how it's organized, which is fascinating. And then also the Black Death had probably its origins in the steppe. And so how did that also impact the Horde and their expansions as well?
Yes, so absolutely. That's also something I discovered actually doing my research. I realized, we think about the Silk Roads, and many researchers also clearly showed that the Southern Road was important through the Indian Ocean. We know that, and there are a lot of information on that. But suddenly I discovered that there was a Northern Road as well. And this was in the end of Batu's descendant and Jochi's descendant. And this was really the north of the world, almost across southern Siberia today. And this Northern Road was in fact extremely important. It was very stable too. And it would be free of, conflict, while roads that would cross Central Asia, especially cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, were more complicated and could be dangerous. While in the north, it's harsh life, but there are not those political issues. So this Northern Road, I tried really to reconstruct like where to stop and how long it was and how long it would take to go from a place to another. And I think there's more work to do on that with, archaeologists also, but we'll find out, exactly the itinerary. And that's, a fascinating road all across southern Siberia. So Russia today up to Mongolia, what is Mongolia today. And we tend to think that the most northern part of the world has a like white and empty place. But actually it was, it was a very dynamic space, and it could be again today. I mean, there are a lot of discussion about this, about Siberia today, and so that's one important aspect. And now concerning the Black Death, so it's a key point also in my book because, of course, many people think that it started in the Golden Horde, in fact, in the Horde, especially in the western part of the Mongol Empire, and that it was transmitted to through the Italian merchants to Europe, which is really certainly partially true. Now we know better the roads of this transmission. It's not through Crimea as we thought before. It was probably through the Azov city, and so it's not exactly the road we thought, but still the interesting thing is we do think that the plague was there in the Mongol Empire before the mid 14th century. I mean, we even think that it was from the very beginning was there in the steppe, and that when people had organized during conquest, for instance, when they were long moment when the army had to stay in one place for a long moment, like in attacking a city, for instance, and staying months sometime around the city, then there were moments when plague would sort of kill people. But the Mongols seem to have found ways to sort of control this. So even if it was there since the 13th century, it did not develop into a pandemic in the Mongol Empire. When it was transmitted to Europe, this became something very different because there people were not prepared at all, and they did not have this huge amount of space in between cities or villages that you see in Central Asia, for instance, or in Russia. So the configuration in Europe, with more density in small cities, that's also we understand why they were more. It became really a pandemic in the mid 14th century, and the impact on the trade market it's hard to really calculate, the impact. But still, for the Mongols, the problem was they relied on their neighbors. The Mongols are not, it's not a closed world. The contrary, they really work with their neighbors, and the fact that suddenly their neighbors were not strong enough to continue the trade as before, the fact that their trade partners failed in a way really disorganized them, and they start some decline, and some problems started also because of this, actually. So I tried to show that in the book, in fact.
Yeah. Well, the last question I have here is twofold. The Horde and the Mongol rule didn't end, but kind of dissolved. How do you explain that difference? And then, what's the legacy of the Horde? How does it stand with other empires? And what can we say about what the Mongols did for us humans in the modern age?
Yeah, well, it's true that I wanted to show that it's very hard to say when exactly an empire stopped, and it's very hard always. It should be a debate, and in the case of the Mongols, there are lot of different versions. And for the Horde, more precisely the Golden Horde, it's somewhere in the 15th century, early 16th century. So what we see, in fact, that actually the nomads start to go to other places. They start to leave the core of their territory. So especially like the big river valley, Volga Valley, we see that they were less and less and less nomad there, and at the end, it's not a power anymore. So they moved to other places, and they created very strong powers in Central Asia, because they went to more like Kazakhstan and created new forms of power. So there's a transmission here. It's not that the legacy of the Horde that time completely disappeared, and there's nothing left. They moved to other places. And what I show also is the legacy was shared also by sedentary people, because we tend to have this dichotomy, nomad there and sedentary there. But no, they work together. At that time, there were a lot of, exchange. And the Russians were not, of course, the reconstruction in national historiography is very harsh against, the Mongol period, like the seen as very negative. But in fact, when you look at the sources, the Russians benefited a lot from the Mongols, because they had the balance. The Mongols were not directly governing them. They did not live in Russian cities. They were in the steppe. So they had a good balanced relationship. And the Russians knew the Mongols well, because they would go to the Mongols for trade, for administration, to pay the tributes, the taxes. So they had a lot of exchange. It's not so we don't have to see them as two separate entities. They are together, but they don't live in the same place. And when in the 16th century, Moscow, this area, became the strongest one in northern Russia, and the Mongol legacy was important for them. They did not disregard it as this is nomads, and they were our hated masters. But on the contrary, we see that they claimed this legacy, and the other interesting thing is probably the nomads also, so that it was not impossible that the Khan now was not a Mongol, but maybe was a Russian Tsar. So I tried to show that this legacy is not, we don't, we tend to forget that it was also a Russian one, a Lithuanian one, in some ways maybe Ottoman one, and so it's much wider spread, really, everywhere. Of course, if we think about today, it's hard because there's no direct connection with this 13th, 14th century. But still, I think that we have to put them on the map again, because it's a long period of history. It was, obscured. we didn't. When I was going to school some time ago, I'd never heard of the Mongols as part of human history, as big creating a big empire, and so this is really part of our human history, I think. And as we are interested in the Ottoman Empire, we are interested in the Roman Empire. Well, we need to be interested in Mongol Empire as well. It's also if we forget this period, there's so many things we don't understand. And people now we work on 16th century and Columbian exchange and the whole big change of the early modern period. They say, wow, but now we understand it better thanks to the new studies on the Mongol Empire, because there's a link in between these two periods, and it was forgotten for too long.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the things that I kind of pulled away from it was a tremendous amount of governance, not just dominance, this immense amount of hierarchy, cooperation, innovation, economic spread, and some, pretty hard times on the planet. I mean, you're just taking a sample, but they did not have the fortune of many of the things that we have in modernity, or even from the full agrarian stage. So there's a lot of things that they were able to do, and we see this from things like the Mayan and Incan empires, etc. So it's just another. I think you're right. How do we encase this example within human history, and then that helps us understand other human histories as well. And so I think it's wonderful. The book again is The Horde: How the Mongols Changed the World. It's magnificent. I really, really, really enjoyed it, and I think there's, even for people that may not be interested in this 14th century kind of history, it is powerful. It's very, very helpful. So where can people find your book, and where can they find you and your research and all of that?
Well, I think they can find my book on internet, maybe on Amazon, and they can order it also in libraries, and they can reach me to my email. I'm really happy. I have people writing to me, and we exchange their questions. I'm always happy to discuss with many people. I have many students, but I also love to talk to people who are not in academia at all, and it's really my pleasure to share this research, because I love to speak about the Mongols and the Golden Horde.
Yeah, no. I have to say this conversation was such a joy to have. You're quite lovely. You're brilliant, and I really just can't say enough thanks for your time and your energy and your mind.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed so much this interview. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.